That's for you too.
Okay.
Hello. Wow. Hello. How are you? We good? Welcome. So far, so good. Oh. Yeah. Okay. I'm Christa Wessel, and I am the early evening host at All Classical Portland, which I assume is the #1 preset button on all your radios, right? That's what I like to hear, 89.9. Tonight's chat, I see a video camera, is being videotaped, FYI, and will be uploaded to the Oregon Symphony's website afterwards, and I'll remind you at the end again where you can check that out afterwards. Anyway, I'm Christa Wessel. This is our guest conductor tonight. He is Maestro Markus Stenz.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm extremely well. I happen to love concerts, and I happen to love performing, and tonight is the night.
It's a good thing you're in this profession then, liking concerts as you do.
I think I ended up in the right corner.
Yes, exactly. So you are making your Oregon Symphony debut. We're so thrilled to have you here. As a bit of background, you may have seen in your program, you have a number of jobs. I'm imagining your business card says Chief Conductor at the Netherlands Radio Philharmonic. And what's the title at the Baltimore Symphony?
It's the principal guest conductor at the
Baltimore Symphony
Orchestra.
And at Seoul, in Seoul, Korea?
The conductor in residence
in
Seoul Philharmonic.
But you live in Germany.
I live in Köln, Cologne am Rhein.
You must have many frequent flyer miles.
True. Yes, but it's usually combined so that the travel is easy enough for me.
Yeah. First time in Oregon, I assume.
Yeah.
Have you had a chance to get out and explore at all?
I have seen a little bit of downtown, and last night we drove into the sunset because we had a run-out concert at Corvallis. So I got to see how Portland is embedded in nature.
Nice. Yes, it is. We cherish that here.
Yeah.
Okay, so I always like to learn a little bit about the people who are visiting or who are going to be on stage. And we mentioned all of the places where you are conducting. But how did you get to this spot? Were you a wee little tyke air conducting when you were small? Did you always dream of doing this? What's your musical background?
I had a moment that I can remember where basically the idea was born that I would want to be and could be a conductor. And that was more or less when I was 13 years old. I was, until then, practicing the piano, some days more diligently than others, and then German television had this marvelous idea of broadcasting Leonard Bernstein's The Unanswered Question, the Harvard Lectures, at a time where, it was like, I had to stay up and, make sure that I didn't miss it in those days. And so I got introduced to what I still believe is the best introduction to the mechanics and mysteries and the magic of music. And that somehow did it for me because, Bernstein at that time, for us in Germany, was the complete antidote to Herbert von Karajan, who would, come across and he would do the New Year's Eve concerts and the big major broadcasts from the Berlin Philharmonie. And so you would grow up with this idea of music being a very serious profession and profound and intense and a corner. But the playfulness, the freedom and the creativity that Bernstein was exuding somehow hit a chord with me. And from then on, the idea was lurking, and when I finished school, I gave it a shot of enrolling into the conducting class at my local university in Cologne when I was 18, and from there I don't think I ever looked back.
Wow. So you studied music in college, piano, or?
No. I went straight into the conducting class. No detour.
That's
no detour. No.
Is that relatively rare?
Maybe it is, but then, conducting is such a unique setup anyway. I mean, we all basically invent ourselves. We all have a different approach to music making. We all have a different thing that basically does it for us. And for me, the idea of sitting down at a piano, with the fingers that don't quite work because I'm nervous, was never explored. But the idea of standing in front of an orchestra and somehow triggering music, or somehow making sure something happens that is close to the creation of the music in the moment, was irresistible.
Huh. I'm imagining your first time doing that, and what a thrill. Did you imagine yourself Bernstein-esque, or?
No, I don't know, because we are all different, aren't we? And, you know, even if you tried hard, you couldn't be Bernstein,
right.
You know? So rather than being like the second best Bernstein, I tried to be the best Stenz there is, so to speak.
Exactly. And I'm thinking about how difficult your job is in that, well, you have 3, I guess, principal gigs, but you do a lot of guest conducting. You're on a plane a lot, and how you must have to adapt very frequently to many different orchestras, many different personnel. Do you feel like you have to shift your interpretations of music no matter where you land?
Definitely, but that would be the case even if I'm in one place. An interpretation is never a set piece. It's not like a movie in that respect. A movie gets shot once, and you know the actors have their timing, and that is captured for eternity, and thus it lives on. Music is created, recreated, I should say. I mean, it's created by the composer, but recreated in the moment by us performers on stage, and even in the rehearsal. And tonight's performance will be different from tomorrow's and from Monday's performance, and already different from what we did last night. And that is despite the fact that we rehearsed here. I always make a point to the orchestras with whom I work, that it should be creative and free enough. It's never going to be a press button performance where we basically do what we have rehearsed on cue, but follow the ideas of the composer.
That's so interesting. We go into a deep philosophical question here, because well, it makes me think about when I was growing up and I was in music school and I was studying my favorite recordings of my favorite Mahler symphonies, say, Claudio Abbado conducting. And to me, that is the definitive way that music should be played. But then I come to a concert hall and it's like, oh, it's not the way I heard it on a recording, which is kind of like, to use your analogy, like a movie, right? They've captured this performance, this interpretation, and I like to I found myself setting my reactions to other interpretations against that movie. Do you know what I mean?
I know what you mean, but you know, just to make a point, I went to hear Abbado conduct Mahler 9 on Friday night, on Saturday night, and on Sunday. And was it different? Yes, it was different, and it was different from the recording too. So there's, you know, never count this possibility out that music will be live.
Right, and very different and exciting. You've got to be on your toes because you're not sure what's going to happen. Well, regarding the music that's on the program tonight, I'm really curious to know how you crafted this program. We've got 2 pretty well-known symphonies sandwiching a very modern, contemporary violin concerto. Tell me the thought behind this program.
Creativity. As simple as that. We have pieces that I totally adore from the set canon of music, you know, Beethoven's First Symphony and Schumann's Third Symphony. Beethoven 1, of course, is the symphony with which he entered the musical universe. So you get the idea of wham bam, of somebody, you know, who's entering the stage and has something to say. And you can see that throughout the piece. The duration is still within the realm of, say, a Haydn symphony or a Mozart Jupiter symphony in terms of sheer duration, but in terms of the way he uses and develops his ideas, it's already signaling that there is going to be a force. So you hear the fresh force of Beethoven in Symphony No. 1. And then Part 2, the Rhenish Symphony, is written by a musical inventor, let's say, of incredible craft. He really is a genius. Herr Schumann, Robert Schumann. We all know in the music business how music can be constructed, or how music can be a piece of architecture or something that you diligently work out. But his ideas, although they are extremely well crafted, they so far exceed this process of just constructing something. They are really divinely inspired. I mean, you get the 5-movement form in the Third Symphony, and you get the 4th movement being very descriptive, you know, grasping the awe that he felt when he entered Cologne Cathedral for the first time. Really an awe-inspiring building, and so he uses the trombones for the first time in that symphony because that's what you associate with church, and it gets monumental and majestic as it reads out there, the majestic. That's the 4th movement. But, you know, just the fact that he uses a 5-movement structure, for example, he doesn't follow the norm precisely because he wants to lead the audience to this movement 4, which is the treasure, the cathedral movement, not with 1 or 2, but with 3 movements preceding it. The first being exuberant, lively, lebhaft, he writes, vivid, full of life. But the 2nd movement being a scherzo, already more gentle in tone. And the 3rd movement, idyllic. And then we are ready for this awe of the sound and the feeling in a big cathedral. And the last movement, of course, is like, woo, you have fireworks again, and we are home. So you see, the way I feel these pieces, you know, I think they really stand for this idea of creativity. I'm also totally aware that we have incredibly gifted living composers who have, of course, the edge over anybody, any Beethoven or any Schumann in this world, because they live amongst us. So they can grasp the spirit of our time without making an effort. There's no translation needed. When we hear Unsuk Chin's music, we hear music that's written in our time. I mean, so to speak, 2004, I think that counts.
Right.
Yeah, 2004. But it's, you know, you don't need a filter in your ears. Sometimes, you know, for the established pieces, you need somebody to explain them to you, or you're grateful for a little hint as to what the audience at the time would have thought. But, you know, make no mistake, Beethoven in his time, he was the contemporary composer.
Right.
And Schumann in his time was the contemporary composer. So Unsuk Chin in our time is the contemporary composer. She's alive, very much so. I know her very well. She lives in Berlin. And I also know the soloist very well, Vivian Hagner. And in fact, we have performed this concerto a number of times together. So we know what this concerto can do. It actually, to be materialistic for a moment, it won a $200,000 prize in 2004, the Grawemeyer Award for an outstanding new composition. So this piece is being recognized as a true addition to the repertoire. A number of high-profile international violin players have picked up the piece and travel with it as well. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it's wonderful, and it is colorful, and I have not had the benefit of seeing a performance, which I think will only enhance my appreciation of it. I've been listening to a recording, and I find myself thinking, what is making that sound? What is that sound? Is that a vibraphone? What is that, a harpsichord? What is happening? And it's this beautiful, colorful sound world she uses.
You could, I mean, you describe this piece in a way that is just so ideal, because that's exactly what I feel. You will see when you will see and hear you, but you will see when you look on stage how some of those sounds are created because you can identify which musician is playing. However, you still have no way of knowing how they are producing those sounds. She does not compose a piece that is following somebody's footsteps. She really invents music in her own right, pretty much like Beethoven and Schumann have been doing in their time. And some of the sonorities revolve around the idea of fiddle players, string players, I should say, being able to produce harmonics. You know this strange concept, you know, then that you have like with the strings, you have an open string, and depending on the touching point with the left hand, it also can be done on an electric guitar, by the way, or any guitar. But depending on the touching point, the open string produces higher pitches, like an overtone series.
Like if you just barely touch the string?
Don't press it down, but barely touch. It's something that you could all do. Let's say, you know, if Sarah the concertmaster would play in like an open string with her bow, and you would venture to just touch the string at the right spot, you would be able to trigger that particular sound just because the right touching point, what the left hand would do, but not pressing it down. So harmonics is, I mean, it's a well-known sound, every composer has used it, but the way Unsuk uses it in her concerto as a feature, you know, going across the strings and having the rest of the orchestra picking up that sound world, so as in order to create a texture that's all-embracing and ethereal and zero gravity. So you will see that the string players for a lot of times not actually pressing down the left hand, but just resting the left hand upon the string as in order to produce that ethereal sound. That's just a feature that then the rest of the orchestra would pick up, like the woodwind or the brass would fade in and out, harmonic style. You will also see a bonanza of percussion instruments in the back of the stage.
I just like hearing that word with your accent. Bonanza.
Bonanza. How would you say it?
Bonanza.
Bonanza. All right, okay.
I've got the list of percussion instruments here. Okay, not to interrupt you too much, but timpani.
Go ahead.
Timpani, cymbals, bass drum, claves. Those are like sticks that you bang together, right? More cymbals. Glockenspiel. Gyro, G-U-I-R-O. I have no idea. Oh, little ratchet sound. Okay. Javanese gong. 2 marimbas, metal blocks, 2 snare drums, steel drum. We're talking like a pan drum, like Jamaican pan drum, or something different than that. Thunder sheet, tambourine, triangle, tubular bells, vibraphone, xylophone, zanza. Is that like a thumb piano imbira thing?
Maracas more.
Okay, maracas. 2 harps, harpsichord. Now, I don't think of a contemporary, modern composer writing for such an ancient instrument.
Third movement. You know when we're talking about harmonics and how there's the string and bow, left hand. There's another technique when you play an instrument, the plucking, pizzicato, pizzicato. Now, the one instrument in the keyboard world that resembles plucking is harpsichord. Pluck, 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 pluck. That's what it does. It just doesn't, you know, like any other keyboard, you would have a hammer or something, but the harpsichord plucks. And only in third movement, which is picking up the concept of energy through plucking, the sonority for the keyboard world switches to the harpsichord. Yeah. In the other movement, it's celesta, celestial, you know, bit of ethereal. It all makes sense, doesn't it? Yeah. $200,000.
$200,000 worth of sense.
Yeah, worth of sense, exactly.
I have to tell you that when I first heard this, the opening...
No, I must explain my for the steel drum.
Okay.
I must, because I don't want to lead you onto the wrong path. The steel drums are not here.
Oh.
We found another way of producing those sounds. They're used in a very delicate way. They would be things that you would probably imagine from Jamaica, you know, like oil barrels or something, you know, where literally you basically find one spot in the lid of the oil can, and you would just hit it, and you find, okay, that's an F sharp, and then, oh, what is this corner? And then, you know, before you know it, you might have a set of, you know, many barrels on stage, and we, because of the restrictions of the space that we had here, we decided to pick up Unsuk, the composer's alternative suggestion, and not put the steel drums on stage, but find other sounds, in this case, on the marimba phone for those particular pitches that she needs. So I was umming and ahhing because I would have, you know, I would have been so disappointed for you to be on the watch out for steel drums and then later on find out, oh, they cheated. We didn't cheat, we have the permission from the composer.
Who you say you know well. I just learned that she is what's kind of artist, not artist in residence, but some similar title at the Seoul Orchestra, where you are...
She was the artistic director until about a year ago.
Okay. And is that how you became acquainted with her?
Well, we knew each other from before, but I think she was the one to plant the idea that the Seoul Philharmonic and we could team up.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
So having known her as you do, are there commonalities across the body of her work? Does this stand out? You mentioned this is a huge prize award-winning concerto. What makes it different than some of her other compositions?
Well, this was very much her early rise to fame. It's one of her very much her first pieces. And since then she has produced a cello concerto, a concerto for the sheng, which is this mad Chinese instrument where it looks like many tentacles, or like a bagpipe.
Oh, wow.
Or something, but a Chinese version of a bagpipe or something. Please don't quote me on that one. But it's one of those unique instruments, and because Unsuk is able to create sound worlds that go beyond your usual imagination. She can write concerti for instruments that are far out, but also on the given instruments, like the cello concerto or like the violin concerto or the clarinet concerto, she can find the sounds that just extend or open new doors for the existing sonorities.
I'm thinking about what you said earlier about how in Beethoven's day, the concerts that were presented were largely contemporary music. Beethoven was writing a symphony, the ink was barely dry, they'd perform it, the audiences were accustomed to hearing contemporary music. But there is a rhythm, a Western predictability to Beethoven's symphonies that I think even in audiences back then, experiencing contemporary music, it was maybe easy to digest those symphonies, and this is a tonal world that's a little bit different than Beethoven.
He got accused of, writing so unmusical and so...
That's true. In fact,
he got accused of cacophony in his time, just like contemporary music composers today.
I guess the overall question is, like, how would you advise us listening to a piece of
Beethoven music? Okay.
To a brand new piece of music that maybe we've never heard before, and something that's different?
Well, look, I think it's really easy. You tap into your basic instinct of curiosity. We all have that. We all, when we drive a different landscape, a new road or something, our eyes are open. Like me driving to being driven to Corvallis last night. My eyes were open. I was taking it in. I saw what was happening, and it left an impression on me. And that is the best state in which you can be for Unsuk Chin's concerto. She will extend the sound worlds that are used to corners that you will not have heard, because I think this is the Portland premiere, isn't it?
Yes.
So, expect the unexpected. How can you do that? It's really is a journey for your curiosity. It's got 4 movements. The first movement really starts with those ethereal sounds, where, with the touch string effect at the right touching point, the harmonics that Vivian produces, very delicate, very smooth, supported by the orchestra and the percussion section in a very gentle fashion. And the rest of the orchestra fades in and out, and then the piece gains momentum, just like a good first movement should do. It should start to rock and roll, and that's more or less what it does. In building sound, in building momentum, in just pumping energy into the hall. The second movement, like in many forms of classical music, the second movement is a serene movement. It's a moment of respite. It's a moment of, once again, where your curiosity will be more drawn towards soft and tinkling sounds. The third movement is the plucking movement, where a lot of the orchestra will pluck. The wild end of the spectrum being the cello and the double basses, because you know how you can pluck in a civilized fashion. You would poof, and you can also rip the string, so that it basically slams back onto the fingerboard. It has your slap, and that is part of the energy you will hear in this third movement. And the last movement is, you know, it's bouncy again, driven, single notes, single events, energy, here, there. It's like a pinball machine. And then close to the end, you will hear how the composer didn't even make an effort to keep the orchestra soft enough to, for the solos to be heard, but on the contrary, produced an effect where the orchestra will, by default, gobble her up. And so, out of that cloud of big sound, she will reemerge, of course, as the singing beauty and bring this piece to a serene and tranquil conclusion, if everything goes to plan.
As I've listened to it now probably a half a dozen times, and what I pick up on, it's hard for me to pick up a theme, like thematic material throughout, but I do hear that the beginning, some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard, those open strings, and it's just like angels singing in this kind of quirky, what's happening kind of way. And then the piece does all these gyrations and kind of ends up, as I hear it, kind of in the same place that we started. Is that about right?
Yeah, good enough for me.
Okay. I'm so glad you ended up in the profession you did, because your enthusiasm is infectious, and I cannot wait to hear this marvelous program, Beethoven, Unsuk, and Robert Schumann.
I should say, it's a program that really is designed for here. I mean, despite the fact that I might have done these pieces elsewhere, in this particular combination, they strike me as a particularly palatable evening, and certainly something for all your curiosity.
Fantastic. Thank you for taking the time today. This is Markus Stenz.
Thank you very much indeed. Enjoy the concert.
Marvelous.
Thanks, Christa.
Thank you so much. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah. Oh, we'll do that again tomorrow.
Yeah, exactly.